Sign these papers. Now, go on. Sign them, he snarled. What he didn't know was that the woman he tried to erase had already written the code that would erase him. A command explodes across the dining hall like a gunshot. Crystal glasses tremble. Conversations die mid-sentence. Richard Sterling, the patriarch, the deal-maker, the man who never hears the word no, towers at the head of the table, his fist wrapped around a manila folder stamped in bold black letters. Divorce. Across from him, Isabella Grant sits frozen, her hand instinctively resting on the curve of her pregnant belly. She's glowing, yes, but exhausted, her skin pale under the chandelier's cruel light. Her husband, Ethan, stands beside another woman, sleek, poised, smiling faintly as if she's already taken Isabella's place. The same woman Richard personally chose to restore the family's image is greater than do it. Richard snaps, his voice gravel and venom. You've drained this family long enough. The room holds its breath. Executives, politicians, investors, all the powerful men who once courted Richard's favor now look anywhere but at the spectacle unfolding before them. It's the kind of scandal that doesn't just destroy marriages, it destroys markets. But Isabella doesn't flinch. She studies Richard, her calm, deliberate. Beneath that silence there's something cold, calculating, dangerous, is greater than, "Are you sure you want me to sign these, Richard?" she asks softly. "Because once I do, everything you own becomes mine." The old man scoffs, not realizing she isn't bluffing. Because tonight's humiliation isn't a tragedy, it's her trigger. Welcome back. My beautiful family and friends. I've missed you all so much. It's been a tough ride with some technical issues, but by God's grace we're getting everything back on track. Thank you for sticking with me. Your support means everything. Before we begin, I want to say a little prayer over everyone watching, especially the women. To the women, may God strengthen you, comfort you, and fill your heart with peace and favor. To the men, may God guide you, bless your efforts, and give you wisdom in all you do. And may God's protection rest on every single one of you. Amen. My friends said, I can't reach 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove them wrong. If you're ready for today's story, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from my USA and UK family. I see you. And please watch till the end, because tomorrow I'll be dropping another story you wouldn't want to miss. Now, let's get into the story. That night would make headlines across every business channel in America. But to understand why Isabella Grant smiled in the face of her own execution, you have to go back to the day she stepped into Sterling Manor and learned what power really meant. The limousine turned up the long marble driveway like a black blade cutting through fog. Sterling Manor rose before her 40,000 square feet of glass, stone, and intimidation. Every column gleamed like a monument to control. Every light was perfectly calibrated to remind visitors they were entering a world that obeyed one man's design. Inside, servants lined the foyer, their faces composed into identical masks of courtesy. At the top of the grand staircase stood Richard Sterling himself, tall, immaculate, a predator wrapped in a tailored suit. "Welcome home," he said, smiling in a way that wasn't a smile at all. Ethan, her new husband, squeezed her hand. "He means well," he whispered, as though reading her unease. But even then, Isabella saw it, the quiet fear that flickered behind his practiced grin. The first few weeks felt like an audition. Every breakfast was a board meeting in disguise. Richard controlled the conversation, the seating arrangement, even the timing of laughter. He spoke of legacy the way generals speak of war. "Family," he told her one morning over coffee, "isn't about love, Isabella. It's about longevity. What you build, you protect. What you protect, you control." He looked at her as though she were another asset in his portfolio. Isabella smiled politely, keeping her voice soft. Of course, Richard. She had once led billion-dollar negotiations on Wall Street, men who mistook her silence for submission until their deals collapsed in her favor. So she knew the game. She knew when to listen, when to nod, and when to hide her intelligence like a blade beneath silk. Her first office in the Sterling Group headquarters was a corner room on the top floor, bright, spacious, overlooking the city. But that didn't last. Optics, Richard explained a week later, calling it a necessary adjustment. He reassigned her to a small guest suite adjacent to the household staff's quarters. Her files were transferred to corporate archives. Her access badge stopped working overnight. Ethan didn't protest. "Dad's just trying to protect the hierarchy," he said. "Don't take it personally. You'll get used to how things work here." She smiled again, because that's what a sterling wife was supposed to do. Inside, though, she was taking notes, mental blueprints of every insult, every rule, every unchecked arrogance that might one day prove useful. Days blurred into routines. Morning breakfasts with Richard, afternoon meetings she wasn't invited to, evenings spent alone in the guest suite, where the scent of old wood and expensive disinfectant hung heavy in the air. Sometimes she'd pass through the estate's west wing, the one with the private offices, and see the walls lined with portraits of sterling men, 5 generations of square jaws and identical ambition. No women, no trace of anyone who didn't fit the narrative of dominance. It was there she began to understand what kind of kingdom she'd married into. A dynasty built not on brilliance, but on inheritance, where control was passed like a family heirloom and dissent was treated as disease. Richard's obsession with legacy grew clearer with every dinner conversation. He lectured Ethan about empire and image, about how weakness was the cancer of men. He referred to Isabella as the wife, never by name. "She'll provide the next heir," he said once, glass of scotch in hand. "After that, she can focus on charity work, something appropriate." The table went silent. Ethan nodded. Isabella stared at her reflection in the wineglass, thinking how easily power turned people into ghosts of themselves. Late one night, she found her old laptop, the one she'd hidden inside a stack of unused linens when she moved in. Its screen glowed faintly in the dark, like a secret whispering her name. She connected to the Sterling intranet, using credentials from an old consulting project. To her surprise, the system recognized her. "Welcome back, Administrator Grant," the header read. Her breath caught. The architecture looked familiar, too familiar. She navigated through a maze of project folders until she saw it. Project Helios. She opened one of the documents and froze. The data structures, encryption models, even the financial shell companies all mirrored a proprietary framework she'd designed years earlier for a renewable infrastructure prototype. The Sterlings hadn't just stolen her code. They had built an empire on it. The revelation didn't shock her. It clarified everything. Every patronizing smile, every dismissal, every rule designed to keep her small. They thought she was furniture decorative, silent, obedient, but she was the architect of their fortune. From that night forward, she stopped feeling trapped. Every interaction became a study. Every conversation, a data point. Richard's routines, Ethan's insecurities, the assistants, the accountants, the digital backdoors in Sterling Group's network, all catalogued in her mind like puzzle pieces. She began working again, though no one noticed. By day, she attended luncheons and fundraisers. By night, she mapped every encrypted channel, every offshore account, every vulnerability in the Empire's digital skeleton. She didn't need an army. She needed access. And she already had it. Weeks turned into months. Her body changed. Her pregnancy showed. Richard called it a good investment. Ethan kissed her cheek out of duty. But inside, something far stronger than fear had begun to grow resolve. Each morning she'd walk through the marble halls and imagine what would happen if she simply turned off the lights, not in the manor, but in the company itself. What would happen if she pulled the plug on everything they owned? That thought became her comfort, her secret lullaby. It was the first time in months she'd felt something close to peace. One afternoon, Richard called her into his study. The air smelled of cigars and arrogance. He gestured to the shelves of ledgers and trophies behind him. "You see this, Isabella? This is what endures. Not sentiment, not emotion. Legacy." She met his eyes calmly. "And legacy, in your view, is control." He smiled. "Exactly. Control is the only kind of love worth having." She returned, the smile slow, deliberate. "Then I suppose I should learn it well." He nodded, pleased with himself. not realizing she already had. That night, she wrote her first entry in a secret digital log she titled Blueprints. Each file contained fragments, transactions, corporate hierarchies, private messages, hidden bank routes. Every piece was another bar removed from the cage they'd built around her. By dawn, she had mapped the entire empire's foundation, and for the first time, the manor didn't look like a prison anymore. It looked like a vault, one she intended to open. They thought they'd silenced her, but even in a cage, Isabella Grant was building blueprints for freedom. Richard Sterling ruled his empire the way ancient kings ruled kingdoms, through fear, spectacle, and performance. Every Monday morning, the Sterling Group's executive board gathered in a conference room lined with glass and intimidation. The skyline reflected off the walls, turning the city itself into a silent witness. Richard stood at the head of the table, tailored and towering, his presence calibrated to dominate. "Helios," he announced one morning, his voice carrying the weight of a verdict. "The world's first $10 billion renewable infrastructure model. Clean energy, clean image, clean profit. We don't just build cities. Gentlemen, we build immortality." A ripple of nervous laughter followed. Every man in that room nodded, even the ones who didn't understand half of what he said. That was how the empire functioned. Obedience disguised as admiration. Isabella sat near the far end, technically invited but treated like decoration. Richard didn't glance her way once, except when he wanted to demonstrate a point. "Even my daughter-in-law," he said with a smirk, "understands how delicate this project is. We can't afford sentiment, not in business, not in blood." The room chuckled obediently. Isabella smiled politely, masking the flicker of something dangerous behind her eyes. When the meeting ended, she lingered behind as the executives dispersed, her gaze drawn to the presentation still glowing on the wall. Project Helios Infrastructure, reinvented. She studied the layout, data nodes, encryption patterns, transaction streams. Her stomach tightened. The design was unmistakable. It was hers. A prototype she'd created years ago while consulting for an investment firm on Wall Street. A framework designed to protect infrastructure investments through layered encryption. She'd shelved it when the project was sold off, assuming it had vanished into the archives. But here it was, repackaged, renamed, and claimed by Richard Sterling. Her fingers brushed the table as if tracing ghosts. She scrolled through the data, finding her old code signatures, small, deliberate markers only she would recognize. Grant, 1, Helios, Gate, Control, Node. They'd even kept her naming conventions. That night, she sat alone in the guest suite, the flicker of her laptop screen illuminating the quiet fury on her face. Richard had built his empire on her foundation. Every press release, every investor pitch, every dollar tied to Project Helios, all of it, stood on the stolen architecture she'd once dreamed of perfecting, and he didn't even know. The realization didn't break her. It refined her. What had started as betrayal now became purpose. She wasn't just going to expose him, she was going to own him. Every arrogance, every insult, every stolen line of code, they were all threads in a web she'd already begun to pull. When the time came, she wouldn't destroy the empire. She'd reclaim it. He thought it was his innovation. She knew it was her weapon. Nights in Sterling Manor were quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that hummed with control. While Richard slept behind locked doors, and Ethan snored in a separate wing, Isabella worked. Her laptop glowed faintly beneath a blanket. Each keystroke, a heartbeat of rebellion. She'd breached the Sterling Group's private servers, crawling through encrypted corridors that once belonged to her own design. Now she saw everything. Offshore transfers masked as consulting fees, bribes funneled through shell companies, secret accounts in Zurich, Dubai, and Singapore. Each discovery was catalogued in her private dossier evidence, meticulously logged under code names only she understood. By day, Richard continued his cruelty. He'd slide her performance reports across the breakfast table, red pen in hand, as if grading an intern. Ethan parroted his father's disdain, mimicking the tone, the smirk, the distance. Isabella said nothing. She simply memorized the details, the dates, the phrases, the passwords whispered carelessly over scotch. Her fear hardened into focus. Her obedience became armor. They thought they were tightening her leash. She was mapping the coordinates of their downfall. Every insult became a password. Every humiliation, a file name. By the 5th month of her pregnancy, Isabella had learned the rhythm of humiliation. It came dressed in civility, Richard's clipped orders, Ethan's empty eyes, the staff's polite avoidance. But nothing prepared her for the day Richard decided she no longer belonged in the main house. "For your comfort," he said, gesturing toward the farthest wing of Sterling Manor. "Less noise, more rest." The guest wing was cold, silent, and isolated from the world, a gilded exile. Ethan didn't object. He only kissed her forehead out of habit, muttered something about father knowing best, and disappeared down the marble hallway. That night, Isabella sat alone by the window, one hand resting on her stomach. "It's just us now," she whispered to the child, who had already felt the weight of power. She opened her laptop. The dossier was complete: 612 files of financial deceit, laundering chains, forged audits, and hidden assets. Years of corruption, sealed and cross-referenced, with backups in 3 encrypted locations. Every keystroke was an act of quiet defiance. When the screen finally went dark, Isabella leaned back, her reflection faint in the glass. The gala announcement glowed on her phone screen, an invitation disguised as opportunity. "That's where it ends," she murmured. "Not me. Them." They thought she'd stay silent. Instead, she scheduled their extinction. Crystal chandeliers shimmered over Sterling Manor's grand ballroom, scattering gold light across marble and champagne. The dinner was Richard Sterling's masterpiece, the celebration of Project Helios, his crowning achievement. Politicians, investors, and media giants filled the room, all toasting the empire he claimed to have built with vision and blood. Isabella stood at the edge of the room, invisible in a gown chosen by Richard's assistant. She was the image of obedience, poised, silent, forgotten. Only the faint glow of her phone beneath the tablecloth betrayed the storm brewing behind her calm. Halfway through dessert, Richard rose to speak. "Tonight marks the next chapter of the Sterling legacy," he declared, voice rich with arrogance. "My son will lead this family into a brighter future." Ethan stood beside him, hand resting awkwardly on the shoulder of a woman in a navy silk dress, his mistress, introduced with a smile sharp enough to cut. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed. Then Richard's hand came down hard on a manila folder. "And as for Isabella," he said, smirking toward her, "it's time she freed herself from obligations she was never fit to carry." The room fell silent. "Sign these papers." Now, dozens of eyes turned, but Isabella didn't flinch. Instead, she reached under the table and pressed her thumb against her phone's hidden command. A quiet click. A digital heartbeat. Her pulse slowed. The countdown had begun. She met Richard's stare and smiled, calm, dangerous, certain. When she pressed that button, $10 billion began counting down to 0. It began as a whisper, the soft buzz of a phone at the end of the table. Then another. Then 10 more. At first, no one noticed. The violinist still played, the champagne still poured, and Richard Sterling still basked in applause. But the laughter faltered as screens across the room lit up in synchronized confusion. "What the hell?" murmured one investor, scrolling furiously. "Is this a system error?" asked another, eyes narrowing at the flashing red notifications. Within seconds, the buzz turned into a symphony of panic. Phones vibrated, alerts chimed, murmurs rose like static. Richard's assistant, pale and trembling, rushed to his side. "Sir, there's a breach. Accounts are freezing. The system's—" "Impossible," Richard snapped, his face tightening. "Our servers are isolated." But the words barely left his mouth before the monitors in the adjacent boardroom flickered to life, unprompted. Massive screens displayed the Sterling Group's internal network lines of code cascading in red, files vanishing in real time. The Sterling logo blinked once, then disappeared. Ethan stumbled forward, confused. "Dad, what's going on?" Richard didn't answer. He was already shouting into his phone, barking orders at IT, demanding updates from bankers. Shut it down. Lock every channel. Across the table, Isabella sat perfectly still, the picture of serenity amid chaos. Her phone was dark now, the trigger pressed. The system unleashed. The algorithm she'd built, buried deep inside Project Helios, was doing its work, wiping shell companies, erasing offshore accounts, rerouting every stolen dollar into federal audit systems she'd quietly notified weeks earlier. A notification blinked across the monitors. U.S. Treasury investigation. Sterling Group assets frozen pending federal review. The room erupted. Investors bolted from their seats, phones glued to their ears. PR agents whispered about scandal, bankruptcy, and subpoenas. The mistress slipped quietly toward the exit, heels echoing against marble. "Isabella," Richard thundered, his voice cracking for the first time in memory. "What did you do?" She turned to him slowly, meeting his fury with terrifying calm. "I told you," she said. "Once I sign those papers, you own nothing." His hand shook as he pointed at her. You can't possibly," but Isabella was already standing. The glow from the collapsing screens illuminated her face, soft and resolute. "I didn't destroy your empire, Richard," she said. "You did. I just made sure everyone could see it happen." For the first time, the great Richard Sterling had no words. As the chaos unfolded, Isabella walked past him, past the table where humiliation had been served like wine, past the cameras capturing his downfall. Behind her, the Sterling name was burning across every financial feed in America. She didn't look back. He asked what she'd done. He never imagined she'd built the detonator. By morning, Sterling Manor was no longer a home, it was a crime scene. News vans lined the wrought iron gates, their antennas piercing the dawn fog. Reporters shouted over one another, cameras flashing as federal agents marched up the marble steps. The great house that once symbolized power now smelled of fear, cold coffee, and paper stacks of seized documents littering the grand foyer. Inside, Richard Sterling sat slumped at the head of the long dining table, the same spot where he'd demanded her obedience hours earlier. His tailored suit was rumpled, his tie askew, his face hollow. Agents moved around him, cataloging devices and files. Every question was met with silence. The man who once roared now only whispered, "It was mine. All of it was mine." Ethan paced near the window, phone in hand, calling lawyers who no longer answered. "We can fix this," he muttered, but even he didn't believe it. Isabella entered the room one last time. The chaos barely touched her. She walked past the trembling staff, past the cameras peering through shattered dignity, and stopped before the table. The divorce papers still lay there unsigned, forgotten. Gently, she removed her wedding ring, set it on top of them, and straightened the stack with a small, deliberate motion. No words, no apologies, just an ending. Outside, a black car waited, engine purring. Isabella stepped into the morning light, one hand resting on her belly. The air felt clean, almost new. Behind her, sirens wailed. Ahead, freedom waited. The empire was ash, but she wasn't finished yet. Dawn broke over Manhattan like a quiet judgment. The city moved as it always did, horns, footsteps, the hum of ambition, but in the penthouses and offices that mattered, one headline cut through the noise like glass. Financial networks replayed the footage on a loop. Richard Sterling's frantic exit from his own gala, FBI agents seizing documents, investors shouting into dead phones. Commentators called it the swiftest corporate implosion in modern history. But across town, in a modest glass office overlooking the Hudson, another story was beginning. The name on the door was new, Hailstone Capital LLC. Its founder was not. Isabella Grant sat at her desk, sunlight spilling over neatly stacked folders. Her phone buzzed every few minutes. Venture partners, global firms, journalists begging for a statement. She ignored them all. Instead, she focused on the monitor in front of her. A transfer confirmation, clean and elegant. The intellectual property, patents, and digital framework, all of it now belonged to her. The same system Richard Sterling had stolen, buried, and flaunted as his legacy was now reborn under her control. She sipped her coffee slowly, one hand resting on her belly. The baby kicked, a soft reminder that life, like power, was something she created on her own terms. She wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. That had already played out. What lingered was clarity, a vision built not from hatred, but from precision. Richard's arrogance had been her blueprint. His greed had drawn her map. On the muted television across the office, a reporter droned on. Federal prosecutors allege years of fraud and offshore laundering within the Sterling Group. Sources say Richard Sterling faces potential indictment, while his son Ethan has reportedly left the country. Isabella smiled faintly. Predictable, she murmured. An email notification blinked. Interested in Partnership Renewable Investment Group, Singapore. She began to type her reply, each keystroke calm, deliberate, unstoppable. Outside, the city glittered, the same empire that had once mocked her, now feeding from her design. Her reflection shimmered in the glass. Serene and certain, the world would call what she'd done revenge. But she knew better. It was reclamation. It was rebirth. She rose, closing her laptop with quiet finality. He thought he owned the empire, she said softly, as if to the unborn child listening beneath her heart. But I built it, and in 60 seconds, I took it all back. The skyline stretched before her, endless, waiting. This wasn't an ending. It was her beginning. He thought he owned the empire. She built it. And in 60 seconds, she took it all back. Subscribe for the next empire she burns. Thank you for watching this story to the end. Thank you for sticking with Mr. David Stories. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out, and do well to click on the subscribe button and turn on notifications for the next story.